Continuing debate, the honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, today I think we have an opportunity in this Parliament to reflect on the different priorities of the different parties. Now, here in the Conservative Party, our priorities are clear. We want to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. Conservatives will axe the carbon tax everywhere for good. The carbon tax is a failed NDP-Liberal policy that has driven up the cost of everything. It has failed to achieve the alleged environmental objectives that are behind it. It has made gas more expensive. Emissions have continued to go up under this government, and so many Canadians are suffering as the price of basic things Canadians buy goes up as a result of the carbon tax. This is why Conservatives, rather than tinkering around the edges, would axe the tax everywhere for everyone and for good. And we want a carbon tax election now so that we can deliver that removal of the carbon tax for Canadians. So Conservatives will axe the tax. We will build the homes. And we've announced a critical new policy this week that would make a significant difference for making homes available for Canadians. And the Liberals' own advisors have praised the Conservative plan for building homes. In the last 9 years, Liberals have failed to build homes. Rent has doubled under these Liberals. As we've heard many times, costs are up, crime is up, rent is up, and that's why time is up for this government. Canadians want a new government that will deliver on a real plan to build the homes. And we will require municipalities to meet critical targets in terms of the construction of new homes. Municipalities that meet those targets will be rewarded. Municipalities that do not meet those targets will lose federal funding. This is the kind of real leadership for results the Conservatives believe in. Liberals want to signal that they care without actually doing the hard work of achieving results. And you can measure the outcomes of their policies in the results. Liberals think it's all about how much money you spend. They profess, look at how much money we've spent on this and how much money we've spent on that. The real test of a housing policy isn't how much money the government has spent, it's how much money Canadians have to spend every month when they pay their rent. A housing policy is working if Canadians are not being forced to pay more and more every month for rent. Yet Liberals want to trumpet their own spending rather than looking at the realities in terms of the costs for Canadians. Costs are up, crime is up. For this government, time is up. Canadians want a government that's going to build the homes. So our priorities are to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. How would we fix the budget, Mr. Speaker? Very simple. We would bring in a dollar-for-dollar rule requiring that when there's a new dollar of government spending, that dollar be identified as coming from somewhere. You can't continually increase spending without ever reviewing and looking at where those dollars are going to come from. Liberals have been living in this economic fantasy world for the last 9 years where you can simply spend and spend and spend without considering where the money is going to come from. Canadians know that's not the reality. That's not the reality that small businesses face in this country. That's not the reality that families face in this country. And eventually that reality catches up with government as well. But in 9 years of this NDP-Liberal government, the national debt has more than doubled. Debt servicing costs have soared. Canadians are paying more because of the carbon tax, but also because of the inflation tax. The way that the increase in government spending is driving up the costs that Canadians face by reducing the value of the dollar in their pocket. If you have more dollars chasing the same amount of goods, that's not going to make anyone richer. That simply means that everything is going to cost more in dollar terms. So we need a government that is going to replace this incontinent fiscal policy with a focused, disciplined fiscal policy that includes a dollar-for-dollar rule. If you're going to propose a new spending program, you have to be able to explain where that money is coming from. And these Liberals, they have run massive deficits in every single year they've been in power. In reality, this isn't what Canadians have traditionally associated with the Liberal Party. It's more of a radical NDP fiscal policy. This is an NDP Liberal government we see. And as we can identify in today's discussion of the corruption motion. We have with this coalition, this effectively reconstituted coalition between the NDP and the Liberals, we have the worst of both worlds. You have NDP fiscal and economic policy, and you have Liberal ethics. And that's what we have with this NDP-Liberal government. The radical far-left NDP approach to the economy applied to government, along with the Liberals' disregard for our institutions, for rule of law, and for the need to have proper accountability in government. You have NDP fiscal policy and Liberal ethics. And so this, again, is why Canadians are looking at the situation and they're saying time is up for this NDP-Liberal government. Time is up for this Liberal government. We need a new government with new priorities, priorities that involve axing the tax, building the homes, fixing the budget, and stopping the crime. Now, Mr. Speaker, on the issue of crime, it's very clear in the last 9 years, under these NDP Liberals, violent crime has gotten so much worse in Canada. And this government should be judged not by their words, but by the results. They will be judged by the results of what they've done. Costs are up for Canadians, and crime is up dramatically because of policy choices that they made. Liberals would always like to present themselves as victims of circumstance. They would like people to believe that as soon as they got into office, things started going wrong, but it had nothing to do with them. That's the story they'd like to tell, Mr. Speaker. And yet you can see with criminal justice policy in particular that they made specific decisions around sentencing and enforcement that changed the rates of violent crime in this country. And so Conservatives will restore common sense when it comes to criminal justice policy. That includes jail, not bail, for repeat violent offenders. And that includes support for treatment and recovery for those who are struggling with addictions. Liberals have pursued a failed drug policy, which is paying the pushers of drugs. Their policy of safe supply is leading more money to go back into the pockets of bad corporate actors like Purdue Pharma, who will make dangerous drugs which are then given away for free at taxpayers' expense to those who are struggling. Conservatives would sue those bad corporate actors like Purdue Pharma and McKinsey who are responsible for the opioid crisis. We would put that money into treatment and recovery. This emphasis on treatment and recovery is going to help address the challenges we face with crime, as well as having, for those who commit violent offenses in this country, they are going to face serious consequences under a common-sense Conservative government. So our priorities are to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime, to restore the country that we know and love, to bring it home, to bring home the country that Canadians remember. Because it wasn't this way before Justin Trudeau, and it wasn't this way before the Prime Minister. I understand.
Point of order, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
So I just want to remind the member opposite, I know he really, really likes him, but he's not allowed to use his name.
Just, I know the Honourable Member will retract that and continue on. The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park versus Gatineau.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The rules of this House don't allow you to say the name of a current member of Parliament, but they do allow you to say the name of a former member of Parliament. So I think I'm a little bit ahead of myself by using his name. But the time will come. The time will come, Mr. Speaker, because soon we will have the time is soon coming. They can't put it off forever. Mr. Speaker, these, as one former British parliamentarian said, even these turkeys can't keep Christmas from coming. We will have an election, Mr. Speaker, and when we have an election, Canadians will have an opportunity to be heard on the record of this failing government, Mr. Speaker. It's a quotation. It's a quotation. Even these turkeys can't keep Christmas from coming forever, Mr. Speaker. Canadians will have affordable food, including turkey, once again. Now, these are our priorities on this side of the House. The Liberals across the way, what are their priorities? Well, their priorities, they are willing to paralyze Parliament in order to protect themselves from the proper investigation of their corruption scandals. Conservatives have put forward a motion that was adopted because all opposition parties voted in favor of it, to order the production of certain documents regarding the government's SDTC scandal. Now let's just break down what this scandal is. For Canadians that are less familiar, what is the Green Slush Fund scandal? Well, this is hard to believe, but you had a group of insiders appointed by this Liberal government to a panel, and they were responsible for handing out money, taxpayers' money, to various companies, and they decided to give those funds to companies that they own, right? So it's like a group of us, we're sitting around the table, we're saying, okay, well, how about first we vote some money for my company, then we'll vote some money for your company, then we'll vote some money for your company. And in some cases, the person, while their company was being voted on, they stepped out of the room. But in other cases, they didn't. We have instances of people actually voting. Are you in favor of giving money to the company that you own? Well, yes, I'm in favor of that, Mr. Speaker. This is the essence of the SDTC scandal. $400 million. You had people sitting around a table who were appointed by these Liberals, charged with handing this money out and deciding to give that money to themselves. Right? It's outrageous. You know, in times past, this would have been like the major decisive story. Today there are so many scandals. It's almost like it's a strategy. These Liberals thought, you know, if we are the cause of as many scandals as possible, maybe there can be sort of dispersed attention on them, right? But this alone, this Green Slush Fund scandal, it's incredible what these Liberals and their elite insider friends thought they could get away with, Mr. Speaker. But it is part of a culture of corruption that we have seen under this NDP-Liberal government. They think they can get away with anything. Having tried to buy off the media with subsidies, they think they can do anything and not be held accountable for it. But Canadians are waking up, Canadians are hearing about these stories, and I know Canadians are demanding accountability and change. Because cost is up, crime is up, corruption is up, and time is up. It's time for an election to throw out these carbon tax, conflict of interest Liberals and replace them with a common sense Conservative government. Let's talk about a few of the other scandals that are going on, Mr. Speaker. I want to share a few comments about this Indigenous procurement problem, the Liberals' Indigenous procurement scandal. This really is one of the biggest scandals that we've seen yet from a Liberal government. So you have a situation with government contracting, a policy in place that says there's a target, a 5% target, saying that 5% of government contracts should go to Indigenous companies. The problem is that these Liberals have allowed many non-Indigenous companies to take advantage of that program by pretending to be Indigenous. And you have various arrangements that have allowed this to happen. You have some outright pretending to be Indigenous. You have instances of abuse of a joint venture. And then you have instances of shell companies. So an abuse of a joint venture might be you have a company with 200 people in it, and it's a fully non-Indigenous company. And then that company is in joint venture with a company that has one person at it, and that company is considered an Indigenous company. So you have a joint venture where the vast majority of the work, the benefit, the profit is going to the obviously much larger partner, but they're entering into a joint venture, so-called, which allows them to officially be labeled as an Indigenous joint venture, even though virtually all of the work and the benefit is going to the non-Indigenous part of that partnership. So this is the abuse of joint ventures that we're seeing that allows effectively non-Indigenous companies to take advantage of the program. And there was an instance reported on in the Globe and Mail with a private company called the Canadian Healthcare Agency that was in so-called joint venture with an individual who was actually one of their employees. So this person was an employee at the larger company. By all indication, wasn't a real joint venture. This employee was being taken advantage of by being identified as having a separate company and in joint venture, and that allowed this non-Indigenous company to take contracts that were supposed to be part of this 5%. And so you have that, and then you have the use of shell companies. So a shell company would be you have one company that is has been identified as Indigenous that's getting these government contracts, then subcontracting the work to non-Indigenous companies. Now, there's a rule that's supposed to prevent this. A subcontracting rule requires that 1/3 of the subcontracts be to Indigenous companies if it's been received as part of that Indigenous procurement set-aside. But we've asked for documents on the verification of the subcontracting rule, and it's pretty clear that nobody's actually enforcing this. And you've got a little bit of that Spider-Man meme of the Minister of Public Services Procurement and the Minister of Indigenous Services saying, well, I'm not doing that, this is Indigenous. Well, I'm not doing that, this is procurement. And then nobody seems to be enforcing those subcontracting rules. So you have these various structures, abusive joint ventures, outright pretending, shell companies, and as a result of this, according to the AFN appeared before the Government Operations Committee on the Liberals' Indigenous procurement scandal and said that most of the contracts within this Indigenous procurement set-aside are actually going to shell companies. So that's the testimony of the AFN. So before Liberals get up and say, oh, this is just Conservatives saying this. No, these are Indigenous leaders. And not just the AFN, leaders from First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities have repeatedly highlighted how non-Indigenous elite insiders are taking advantage of this program that's supposed to benefit Indigenous businesses. And it's a crying shame, but it's typical of these Liberals. They didn't care about the results for Indigenous peoples. They only cared about being able to look like they were checking a box to say that they cared. So they want to say, hey, look at the number, look at this target, look at this box we're checking. But in reality, when the Government Operations Committee started going into it and started inviting Indigenous leaders to speak before the committee, we found that according to the testimony, most of what they're saying is part of that 5% target isn't going to Indigenous communities at all, isn't even going to Indigenous businesses. And in fact, when we challenged the Minister of Indigenous Services on this the first time back in March, she said, well, the purpose of the program is just to identify indigeneity. It's not about economic development effectively. She's saying it's just about identifying indigeneity. She completely changed her tune 6 months later. But when the program is allowing shell companies, elite non-Indigenous insiders, abusive joint ventures, outright pretenders to take advantage of the program, clearly the benefit's not going back to Indigenous peoples, and these Liberals don't seem to care. They want to trumpet the box-checking exercise rather than answer clear, necessary questions about the impacts of this program on communities. And I know from speaking to Indigenous leaders across the country, they talk very much about the importance of economic development, of autonomy, of giving back control over resources, over opportunities, and putting in place policies that allow Indigenous communities to survive and prosper. And one key piece of feedback we've heard is about how there are various policies in procurement that actually make it very difficult for new entrants, including Indigenous and minority-owned businesses, to get contracts. Because the Liberals have so constrained the procurement system as to protect the privileged access of elite insiders. We saw this with the Arrive scandal as well. With the Arrive scandal, you had, according to the Auditor General's report now, you had an instance where GC Strategies actually sat down with people inside of government to discuss the terms of the contract. According to the Procurement Ombudsman, you had overly restrictive requirements that said, for instance, you could only bid on a federal government contract if you've done a certain number of federal government contracts before. Well, how does that make any sense? If you're a business that can do the work, maybe you're a new business, maybe you're based somewhere else in the country, maybe you're started by someone who doesn't have the same insider access or in a history with the federal government, but can't actually do the work. Maybe that business has actually done work with other levels of government, has been successful in procurement processes across the country, but then they want to bid on a project here in Ottawa, and the government says, well, no, sorry, you haven't done business with the federal government before, so you're out. Entrenched protection of privilege for elite, liberal-connected insiders. And these are huge amounts of money we're talking about. The Liberals' Indigenous procurement scandal, you have a number of players. Dalian Enterprises, over $100 million in contracts they've got. Canadian Healthcare Agency, over $100 million in contracts. A majority of those who got contracts under this set-aside were shell companies, according to the AFN. So we're talking massive amounts of money that these Liberals are finding ways to funnel to their friends and to other well-connected insiders. Those are their priorities, getting money to elite insider NDP-Liberal friends. Our priorities are restoring common sense, bringing it home, axing the tax, building the homes, fixing the budget, stopping the crime. And when the carbon tax election comes, Canadians will be able to decide between our priorities and theirs.